Not much further. Angel and traveller met on the road, chasing a rainbow for a pot of gold. Mum, are we there yet? Not much further. Rainbow, 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 rainbow.
So welcome to the Rene Kassan podcast with me, Woodsia Stremska, the communications manager at Rene Kassan. Rene Kassan is the Jewish voice for human rights and is named after the French Jewish co-author of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our mission is to promote and protect the universal rights of all people, drawing on Jewish experience and values. We work within the Jewish community by building support for human rights, values amongst British Jews, and in the wider community by bringing the authority of a Jewish perspective on issues that resonate with Jewish experience. The last decade has posed enormous challenges to human rights that establish a humane, just, and dignified life for people reaching British shores. However, an inefficient, unjust, and expensive immigration detention system, the criminalisation of refugees for reaching the UK through irregular routes, and the absence of any legal and safe routes for those seeking safety are all aspects of policies that have created an even more hostile environment for migrants and refugees. At Rene Kassan, we believe that the British public and the Jewish community have an important stake in maintaining a domestic protection system for refugees and asylum seekers. Throughout history, the ability to seek refuge has been essential to Jewish survival, and the horrors of the Holocaust led to the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and the Convention relating to the status of refugees in 1951. For this reason, we work to challenge the hostile environment towards refugees by advocating for more humane attitudes, effective policy responses, and adherence for international human rights norms, and the specific objectives include advocating for safe and legal routes for refugees, promoting non-custodial alternatives to immigration detention, establishing a humane limit on immigration detention, emphasizing the value of existing domestic and international human rights frameworks, and mobilizing the Jewish community to advocate for refugees and asylum seekers. And today is a very special Rosh Hashanah episode. And as Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, it's time for reflection and renewal. And we take stock of the year that's passed and set our intentions for the year ahead. And tradition calls us to not only look forward, but to look outward and see those in need, to welcome the stranger and to stand for justice. And this year, we promise to renew our commitment for refugees in the UK. People fleeing war, persecution, and danger are too often met with closed doors and hostile policies. And in the year ahead, Rene Kassan will continue to defend the rights of those seeking safety, challenge laws that harm, and build communities that welcome. Together, we can make this year a year of compassion, courage, and change. And our pledge for the new year is for all those seeking refuge should be welcomed. And today I'm welcomed by Enver Solomon, who is the Chief Executive of Refugee Council. And before joining Refugee Council, he had senior management posts at the National Children's Bureau, the Children's Society, and Baranos. Enver has also sat on the advisory boards at the Department of Education, HM Inspector of Prisons, and the Office of the Children's Commissioner. His chairmanship roles have included the Standing Committee for Youth Justice, End Child Poverty Campaign, and the Trustee Board of Asylum Aid. Thank you so much for joining us today, Enver. Before we get on to the questions, would you like to introduce Refugee Council and what you do?
Thanks very much for having me on. So, Refugee Council, we're the oldest single provider of services to refugees and people in the asylum system in the country. We were born in 1951 when the UK was one of the founding signatories of the UN Convention on Refugees. And ever since then, we've worked very closely with government at local level and at national level, supporting programs for refugees. So way back, for example, when people came from Vietnam, at the time they were known as the Vietnamese boat people, we worked with government to support the delivery of a program to welcome those refugees, right up to more recently with the Ukrainians coming on the Ukrainian program. And we operate across England. We have sister organisations in Scotland and Wales, and we work with around about 15,000 people a year, both men, women, children who've come here alone too. We have a big program supporting them. And then we try and influence the debates, the public conversation, and influence and lobby governments. And we're always seen by government and MPs and members of the House of Lords as a key organisation working with refugees. So we do get quite a considerable hearing amongst parliamentarians and decision makers.
Yeah, and you also lead on a lot of the APPGs as well, especially on safe routes, that I mean, all the sectors also been very involved with. Thank you so much. So we'll move on to the question. So firstly, what personal experiences have you utilized in your approach to campaigning, seeing as you've campaigned in so many different areas, but specifically towards refugees and asylum seekers?
So actually, I've got quite an interesting background. I started off my career in the BBC. I went into BBC World Service Radio and Television as a trainee journalist, and I spent the first decade of my career working in the BBC, abroad, reporting from Southeast Asia, and then working back in the UK on some of the big flagship programs on BBC Radio 4, the World Tonight program, the PM program, and I spent some time also working on BBC television documentaries as well. So I think that background has really brought home to me the importance of communications and the power of the media and how you engage with the media in shaping public opinion and the public narrative. And for me, I think it's really important to work with journalists and to actually not work against them and not see them necessarily as the opposition or as a force that's trying to damage the refugee cause, but actually to build bridges, to build relationships, to get to know different media outlets, different journalists across a whole range of different backgrounds and media. And linked to that, the importance of enabling them to understand the issue, educating them, informing them, and the use of really good, strong, compelling storytelling that puts refugees right at the heart of the narrative and that helps challenge misinformation and really builds a better understanding of the refugee experience, the refugee cause, and the way that we want to see refugees treated in the UK.
I think that's such a vital thing that you said, especially towards how the media has such a power to change public perceptions as well, because a lot of people don't only kind of see what the media says and take that on as kind of truth and all of that. So I think that's really powerful. What about your, I mean, if you don't want to talk about this, let me know, but your own family experience of, I mean, I know because your family also were refugees at some point. I don't know whether you want to touch on that as well.
Yeah, my own family background is very much part of it for me too. Of course, my father's family were Jewish refugees fleeing the pogroms in Eastern Europe over a century ago, and they settled in Merseyside. And then my mother came here from apartheid South Africa, fleeing apartheid South Africa. She didn't need to come seeking asylum because at the time South Africa was part of the Commonwealth. And as an African woman of Indian descent growing up in South Africa, my family were very involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. So she came here with her brother in the 60s on a visa because South Africa was part of the Commonwealth, as I say. But those family backgrounds and histories for me are very much part of my own personal commitment to the refugee cause and the importance of the refugee cause and the importance of a world where we recognize that collectively we need to welcome refugees and not try and build walls and push people away, but have a notion of a shared international commitment to supporting those who do have to flee for their lives.
And that's also a really important aspect. It's a lot of time when refugees come, it's because they are fleeing. They don't want to, a lot of people don't want to leave their families or their homes, but they're forced to, which I think a lot of people don't realize the gravity of that. So kind of moving on to the next question. how are refugees currently coming to the UK, and why? Why? I mean, we've kind of touched on it, but specifically on about persecution and looking for safety. But can you tell us more about, yeah, how they are coming?
Well, right now, today, most refugees who make it to the UK do it in two ways. They either come through specific government schemes, such as the one I mentioned earlier, the Ukrainian scheme, or previously the one for Afghans, which is now being changed a bit. Or, and this is the case currently for the vast majority, they're having to make dangerous journeys, often in small boats, not just across the Channel, but coming across the Mediterranean, very dangerous journeys over land where they face threats, abuse, even sometimes threats to their life that are very serious. And the reason people make these very dangerous journeys is because for most nationalities, there's no safe or legal way to apply for asylum from where they're coming from. Just for example, if you're fleeing the horrendous civil war today in Sudan or persecution by the regime in Iran, you can't simply get on a plane with the requisite travel documents and come to the UK. You face no other option but to gather as many of your possessions as you can, as much money as you've got, pay people smugglers who are obviously exploiting people's desperation and take a very dangerous journey to get to the UK. And it's also important to remember that many people will want to come to the UK because of family connections. They'll have family here. They might have diaspora community here who are well settled. They might be able to speak some English. They might come from a country that have historic connections to the UK too. And they also will hold a belief that Britain will treat them fairly and will respect their rights. So the challenge is really making sure that people don't have to make dangerous journeys, but can come here safely without having to put their lives at risk.
Thanks. And especially, I think the important thing there you said also is talking about, the historical aspect. Because like you said, many people ask, like, why don't they go to France? Why don't they stop at Italy? But because of the languages are really massive at Pact, or in fact that your culture is more embedded in British society and British culture than of any other countries. And that's also a really key aspect, I think, to really consider when people think about why refugees want to come to the UK for specifically. Um, so you touched on what safe, some kind of safe routes. But can you tell our listeners what safe routes specifically are and how they work and what schemes there are already in place?
Yeah, so in terms of safe routes that exist, essentially safe routes are legal pathways that lets people that are fleeing war or persecution come to our country without having to take dangerous journeys. They're able to come here on a scheme that is operating legally with what are called pathways to reach the UK. So if you think of the Ukrainian program, people were able to go to a what's called a visa center, British visa center in Poland or as close to Ukraine as possible, get a visa to then travel legally to come to the UK, and then once they're here, to have their visa recognised and to be allowed to stay for a fixed period of time. The problem is that these routes don't really exist beyond some very specific and discrete programs. And of course, they are vital because it means that people don't have to turn to people smugglers. It saves lives, and obviously, it works in that sense. And it's incredible that the way the communities across Britain have responded to Afghans, Ukrainians, and Syrians, all who had these schemes to come to the UK. But the problem is they're very limited. And if you're coming from a country where there isn't a safe scheme, isn't a safe route, isn't a legal pathway to come to the UK, you have no other option but to take a very dangerous journey. And then when you get to the UK to apply for asylum and to go through that process where there's all kinds of challenges in terms of access to legal advice, in terms of delays in decision making, in terms of given very limited amounts of money to live on every day. That's the only option that you face. And the need for more safe routes are really important. There's one additional safe route that is worth mentioning that is significant, is the opportunity to come and be with a very close immediate family member. But that route is quite limited. For example, if you're a child traveling alone to the UK, you're not allowed to apply to be with your family members. So you can take a very dangerous journey. Siblings aren't allowed to apply to be with a sister or a brother who's already in the UK. So the opportunities for that, what's called family reunion route, are very limited. And that is really one of the safe routes that does and should be expanded.
Do you think from that, how do you think the UK government can expand the use of safe routes? I assume one of the ways would be to allow siblings to support their siblings or grandparents and all of that kind of stuff. But is there also another way that could be possible, such as humanitarian visas also?
Yeah, absolutely. There's expanding the opportunity for family members to come and join other family members that are here already. But there's other schemes that we at the Refugee Council have put forward. So one is, as you say, a humanitarian visa. So that might be the opportunity, like people did when they fled Ukraine, that you could apply in a neighboring country. So, for example, you fled Sudan, you're in Chad, you could go to a UK visa centre or consulate, and you could apply for what's called a humanitarian visa to give you safe passage to get to the UK. And then when you're here, you could go through the asylum process. That is one of the options that really should be looked at, particularly for nationalities where there is a real urgent and pressing need, like people fleeing Sudan, where there's a horrendous civil war, just as bad as what's played out in Ukraine, and sometimes on a more dangerous scale for large groups of people. Where that is present, there's a real need to put in place that model of a humanitarian visa. And there's other ways you could do it as well. It was interesting, the Biden administration, and it isn't talked about very much, put in place opportunities for people that were coming through the southern border into America, the opportunity to apply for a visa so they didn't have to take a dangerous journey for certain nationalities. The quid pro quo that they put in place, which I wouldn't advocate, but is just one example of what's been tried, is that they said to people, if you don't apply for this visa and then you come by yourself on a dangerous journey, we won't allow you to come into the country and apply for asylum. You'll need to go back and apply for that visa route. So there's different ways that the government really could look to trial, pilot, and expand more what called safe routes, legal routes, so people don't have to take dangerous journeys.
Because I know the Refugee Council has also proposed specific nationalities also to trial out more safe routes, and they're all specifically nationalities that are taking dangerous journeys via small boats, or the rhetoric that's being used. So I was just wondering whether you could expand a bit more on that, and why would that would be quite an effective way to take forward as well.
Yeah, so we've looked at those people that come from countries where more often than not, the vast majority will be granted asylum, such as Sudanese, such as people coming from Eritrea, Iran, etc., because the vast majority of the cases of individuals from those countries are seen as a very compelling case and are granted asylum. And we're saying that those so-called, what are called high grant rate countries, if you gave them the opportunity to apply for a humanitarian visa, you'd be reducing the numbers taking very dangerous journeys, and it could be a really effective means to also dismantle the business model of the people smugglers who are targeting people from those countries as well, because that trade, everyone is in agreement that trade is very nasty, it's very exploitative, and the only way you're really going to address it is to reduce the so-called flow of people that are demanding support or demanding the help's not the right word, or demanding that people smugglers they use that route to take the journeys that they need to take to reach safety in the UK and other countries.
And I think the other important thing to keep in mind as well is actually people coming on small boats, a very small percentage of actual immigrants and refugees coming over. I think it's around 1% or 2%, something like that, which I think is another thing that is exacerbated quite a lot in media and blown out of proportion of how many people are actually coming over.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. The whole debate and conversation around migration has been made so toxic by giving greater prominence to the word illegal migration that now polling shows that the vast majority of the public think all migrants that are coming here illegally. But absolutely, of the hundreds of thousands that come here as migrants to the UK every year, the vast majority of them are coming here legally. You know, well over 80% are coming here legally. So that tells a story of how the political debate has skewed the public understanding, and then people don't make a differentiation. They don't understand the difference between illegal. They just think all migrants are coming here to break the rules, to break into our country, and are all in their mind because of what they've heard from politicians. They're all here illegally, which of course is not what the figures and the official data shows.
Exactly. And that brings us nicely on to the next question. So, as you said, there's a lot of misinformation about refugees in the media. Um, what's the one myth, if you could pick one, you kind of wish you could dispel and for everyone listening right now?
Well, I think the biggest myth is that refugees are a threat to our communities and to Britain, that they're all seen as some kind of group of illegals that are going to damage our country and our communities. But of course, in reality, as we know, they're people, men, women, and children like you and me, like people listening to this podcast, who have fled, you know, horrendous violence, horrendous conflicts, horrendous torture, horrendous abuse, or the threat of it, and are often having to leave everything behind: their communities, their lives, their jobs, their families, their friends. And our teams at the Refugee Council that are working, supporting refugees and people in the asylum system, we see this every day, this truth, if you like. The refugees are parents, they're students, they're people who've worked in jobs, in business, for example. They're people who just want to rebuild their lives, give back to the communities that welcome them, and move on. Just, you know, let me give you an example. One man we support with who now works for a food poverty charity as a driver up in Yorkshire, delivering food supplies to people who are facing poverty or on the breadline, or a doctor from Afghanistan who, through a program we're involved with the NHS, has been able to retrain here and is now working in our NHS. Indeed, there are many refugees that work in different roles in our NHS. So I think that myth that we need to address and we need to take challenge is that we're talking about people who are a threat, who are some kind of danger to us, and we actually need to talk about them as men, women, and children, who they are, what they've experienced, what they're coming from, and also remind the British public of all the refugees that have come here and settled already, and the contribution and the part that they're playing in British life. So when they hear a negative story, they can think, oh, hang on a minute, but that's not my experience, because I know so and so who helped me when I went to the doctor, or when I was in the health service, for example. So they can make that connection between the real life value that refugees bring to our community and to our society.
Exactly, and I think one of my great wishes would be to see more positive stories of refugees within the media and celebrated and shown the integration. Because as you said, so many refugees just they're not just refugees; they are doctors and students. Everything that you mentioned, they want to work, they want to be able to carry on living and support their families if they have if they're lucky enough to have their family with them, which also is just a right that we all take for granted. And that's another thing I think people forget a lot of the time is you know, we have these universal human rights, but when we don't have, and we take them for granted every day, and when we don't have them, that's when we kind of realize. So I think that's the other thing that would be really important for people to realize is, we're only fighting for the rights that we already have, really. Um, so speaking of that, what gives you hope in this field of work, even when the political climate feels very hostile at the moment?
Well, I think there's two things that give me hope. Firstly, it's knowing that there are refugees in our communities up and down the country, and many of the listeners to this podcast will have family members who have been refugees, who are very much part of the fabric of this country. They are who we are as a country. And I think lots of people know that despite some of the negative political rhetoric. And alongside that, it's knowing that I think that public opinion isn't fixed. Our work looking at what the public think and doing focus groups and being involved in polling with organizations that are specialists at public opinion research is that many people who might be skeptical, who might be unsure, who might at times feel a certain degree of anxiety or worry about refugees and migration, that they can be persuaded of the need for us to uphold our tradition of giving people sanctuary. And they can be persuaded of the need to have that system in place that protects those fleeing war and persecution, and the importance of our country, the UK, playing our part in providing sanctuary to people alongside other nations playing their part too. And I think that idea that we're not just an island nation that pulls up the drawbridge or builds walls. We're actually a nation where we understand the importance of showing compassion and kindness to people who come here in need of safety and sanctuary. And that the idea that we're part of a greater humanity, that there is a shared greater humanity, is still very much present amongst the UK public, but it just needs to be nurtured and encouraged and supported more.
That's really great to hear. And if you had one message for policymakers ahead of the next parliamentary debate on asylum, what would that be?
It's a very simple one here, but it's so easily lost that we are talking about people. We're talking about people like them who have lives, who might have a wife or a husband, who might have their own children, who might have grandparents that they have had to look after, people who have had jobs, who want to get on with their careers, that want the best for themselves and their families, who simply want to play their parts alongside other people across that shared world of a collective humanity, and that they want to be able to get back, stand on their own 2 feet, and rebuild their lives in safety. They don't want to rob us of anything. They don't want to take from us. They don't want to even be seen to be taking more from the UK than giving back. People often forget that, and we see this in our work at the Refugee Council through refugees and people seeking asylum that we support. The idea for them of coming to a country and having to just take is something that's deeply shameful based on their own cultural backgrounds, their own experiences in the countries that they're from. They don't want to be in a position where they're just being given in the language of certain politicians of handouts. They don't want that. They want to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, play their part, and be proud in doing that. Of course, they want to be able to earn a good living, but they recognize that as part of that, they want to be able to give to the country that has welcomed them by paying taxes, by playing their part. And of course, when they have extra money, to be able to send it back to family members who they're hoping to support who haven't been able to come to the UK. So the message that they need to really hear loud and clear is that we're talking about people like them. And we're talking about people who, like them, have the same aspirations, dreams, and hopes, and have the same feelings and sentiments about how they want to be and how they want to live alongside other people in communities.
That's really great. And I think the other thing to also mention is that, a lot of refugees, because they can't work, a lot of them aren't allowed to work with the regulations that they're given, but they volunteer and do other things in order to be able to feel like they're giving back to the community as well. Because I know this one doctor, or he was a doctor in the country that he came from, couldn't work, but did everything in order to volunteer and be able to still practice basically until he's hopefully given us the right to asylum as well. And then just on the final question, so what can individuals themselves, like people listening or out in the UK, do to support the expansion of safe routes to the UK?
Well, there's actually a lot that people can do. You can write to your MP and ask them to support more safe and legal pathways for refugees to come to the UK, so they don't have to make dangerous journeys. They can support organisations like your own and like René Cassin and like mine, the Refugee Council, that campaign for change. And also organisations like mine that run services, community services. They can volunteer to support refugees, for example, to learn English, or to support refugees to take on skills. For example, we run gardening projects, just as an illustration for people in the asylum system. Because as you say, if you're in the asylum system, you can't work. You're only able to work after 12 months. And even then, you're only able to work in relation to specific occupations that are on what's called the shortage occupations list. And there's a very narrow number of those. And then the loops and hurdles you have to get over to demonstrate that you've got the requisite skills for an occupation on that list are very difficult and challenging. So volunteering to support refugees to do the things that they want to do whilst they're waiting for those that are in the asylum system for their case to be heard and dealt with. And then on a very simple, kind of more micro level, you can also challenge misinformation when you hear it, whether that's a colleague at work or a neighbour or someone in your circle of family and friends, or someone you might know through the synagogue, for example, by having conversations with them and by building people's understanding and knowledge of the experience of refugees. Lots of people, for example, think that people in the asylum system can work. They don't realise that they can't work. So I think challenging misinformation, educating and informing people is a really valuable thing that people can do whenever the opportunity arises.
And that's really vital information as well as the saying, it all starts in close places, small to home, as we like to call them. It all starts within your own community, and the little opinions that you might be able to change actually help shape maybe even policymakers at some point, because it's kind of a chain of reactions in that way. So I think don't underestimate the simple conversations that you have, even someone at a bus stop, or maybe not a bus stop, but at parties or whatever. Because I know I've had conversations at friends' houses and that have shaped their perspective, just because they were going off what the media said rather than actual facts from human rights organizations or charities that work with these people on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I think that's a really powerful way to end on this.
Yeah, that's right. Don't underestimate the ripple effect that those conversations can have.
Exactly. That was the word I was looking for. Thank you so much, Enver, for such an incredible and inspiring conversation from personal to policy and all everything around. So yeah, thank you so much. And join me next time for a continued episode into our refugee series.
Are we there yet? Mom!